let me switch over the screen here, and I'll pull up something. We'll get rolling. So for those of you that were on the call beforehand when I started with Lori, I was kind of talking about, in terms of the solution, I really do believe that identifying issues are important, and yet getting back to the nitty-gritty, the basics of what works is what I want to focus on. So this chat clearly is going to be about crisis fatigue, the different things that are going on, how COVID has changed our world. And yet, in order to get back to good sleep habits, for those of you that have been on other calls, some of this may seem similar, but we want to get back to what works, right? But so either way, I will definitely go through the crisis fatigue aspect, because it is something that is on everyone's minds. It's impacting all of us to some degree. So quick agenda here: crisis fatigue, looking at the root of change, looking at patterns, understanding, ourselves, what's going on, how we are responding. Helpful sleep behaviors, looking at right now, looking towards the future and how we adapt. Sometimes looking at, backup plans and taking things a day at a time. That's kind of our agenda here. So yes, crisis fatigue. So basically, crisis fatigue, it's a term that's based on stress over a longer period of time. So with temporary stress, specifically from a physiological standpoint, our adrenal glands increase cortisol, adrenaline, right? So this is this fight, flight, freeze response. The parasympathetic nervous system is activated. It allows us to go above and beyond what our normal body necessarily would. I guess that's kind of a way of putting it. So the whole, if we're fleeing from danger. However, clearly over the last hundreds of years, if not thousands, and long period of time, we have started to adapt as humans, since we aren't in immediate danger as frequently as potentially, if we have large animals chasing us or whatever. We start to adapt normal or more normal situations and feel more anxiety stemming from them. So, right, if we're talking about work stressors, if we're talking about family life, we're talking about interpersonal or other different things that have been impacted by COVID, they clearly are important. They're not one of those things that is life-threatening, though. So with a crisis, we think about kind of more so in the life-threatening aspect. We have evolved as humans. In this way, we have evolved towards feeling stress and anxiety more often. Crisis fatigue occurs when temporary stressors become more permanent. The body starts to kind of shut down in different ways. So what happens, what occurs, feelings of numbness, being overwhelmed, hopeless at times, these are all kind of natural responses to sustained levels of stress. We're not necessarily supposed to, from a physical standpoint, from a mental standpoint, we're not supposed to be having that much stress going on in our lives, right? What we want to do, and hopefully what I'm going to chat about here, is not only the mental health aspect of being able to balance things out a little bit better, but also really focusing in on how have we gotten away from good sleep habits. So there's a phrase that I like to think about in situations like this, that is either we take time for health or we must take time for disease. And that's an important thing to think about, because a lot of times I think that in terms of dealing with self-care and being more aware of exercise and mindfulness or other things, we kind of think of that as like, oh, we can put it on the back burner, right? But if you really realize, if we don't take time for health, at some point, this sustained stress level is then going to impact our health, and we are going to need to take time for it. So just something to think about. In general, clearly, quarantine sucks. Let's face it. Everyone, and except for the extreme introverts of the world. Pretty much, we're all on the same boat here. But the thing is, you have to remember, this is not the end of the world. At least I'm hoping. It's not the end of all things. We must adapt. So I will paraphrase here. When I was creating this talk, when I was thinking about this, the word must, technically, we don't have to. A must is air. It is food. It is technically sleep as well. Most other things, there isn't necessarily the exact need to. But in terms of changing, if we do what we've always done, we will get what we've always got. So in those terms, we must adapt if we want a different response. And basically, this premise is learning to respond differently. That's what this comes down to. The thing is, we cannot control external factors in our day-to-day life. It's true. And I'll say it again. We cannot control every factor in our lives as much as we try to control all of these aspects. I mean, some of these things are very clearly obvious. Can't control the pandemic, right? But what can we control? That is what we want to focus on. And so again, beforehand, when I was talking about the problem, and I always find it interesting with these kinds of these topics or talks, sometimes I hear about, people wanting to talk about the problem. I want to talk about the solution, right? It's about responding differently. That's what we should be placing our focus and attention on, is responding in a different way. So something that I think also is important in thinking about this whole scheme of change is that a lot of times we get to a point when we're trying to change something. So again, if you're thinking about a different scenario, in the past, and you've gotten to a point and you weren't willing to change. So weight loss, this could be starting a educational program, this could be doing something, participating in an activity, whatever. Think about if it didn't work out, the reason most likely, not in every case clearly, but is that we are not willing to go beyond something. There's something that we're not willing to necessarily do. Sometimes there's good reasons for that. But other times it's based on, we're willing to do something, but not, the next step. And clearly I'm not giving specifics because every situation is different. But the root of all change really does stem from an idea, actionable steps, moving in a certain direction, and then either we get there or we don't. And usually if we don't, it's because we are too uncomfortable. And part of this is then realizing, okay, what's the payoff? If the uncomfort is what's stopping us from progressing, there's usually, something that we're getting out of it. So for example, I don't know, again, just a random example off the top of my head is weight loss. So if weight loss is going well and then eventually you get to a point where it's just too many days and using food as a stress relief kind of thing, that's the payoff, having comfort from getting off of the diet or whatever, so just kind of a general example there. So it's important to understand yourself in this process. So think to yourself over the last few months, what has been going on? Everyone's lives have changed in one way or another, right? Have you added bad habits, right? Are you one of those people that have been going to bed later, watching TV, looking at the news too much, being on your phone, watching clocks? Has this changed? Or maybe this has just been the same for a long, long time, but understanding and seeing things like, these behaviors and rituals, it's important. It's important in this process to realize if I do something, I'm going to most likely have a consequence. Sometimes the consequence is good. Sometimes it's not. If we're, in bed, if we're watching TV or on our phones, The consequence would most likely be reduced melatonin, the natural hormone in our body, because of the light exposure. Light exposure is then impacting our body. So again, it's important to start understanding what is going on. Is this benefiting sleep? Is this potentially taking away from sleep? Other situations, work, family, significant others, interpersonal relationships, sometimes it's a good idea to realize, if in terms of stress levels recently, is it possible to get out ahead of this situation, right? Is it possible to think of a different alternate route kind of thing? And where does sleep fit in? Are you one of those people that is taking sleep as, I'll do everything else, take care of everything else, sleep comes second? Is it, there's a lot of different ways of looking at this, but where does sleep fit in? We want to look at middle of the night. Has this changed, over the last couple months? Are you waking up frequently? Is it for the restroom, for, your significant other who sounds like a freight train? They're snoring so loud. Are you staying in bed for hours and hours and hours? Again, these are all things that potentially, can negatively impact sleep for one reason or another. And mindset clearly is kind of the biggest thing of this talk. So what's your mindset like at night? How has COVID, or, to be honest, crisis fatigue, it's not necessarily only COVID going on, but how are other things impacting your mindset? Do you feel relaxed? Are you in a place where you're allowing your body to do its thing? A lot of times when I work with people, it's more so based on that it's almost like a sympathetic, nervous kind of arousal kind of thing, where their whole body is activated. They're thinking, their mind's going they're thinking about tomorrow. They're worried about the path. All these different things are going on, which again, just are getting basically in the way of allowing your body to do its natural thing. So people will use sleep aids to somewhat knock themselves out. Sleep aids are meant to be used for a relatively short amount of time. They're using distraction to help quiet their mind. And the thing is about distraction, sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not, right? So we want to start looking at what is going on, the situation, our mindset. How are we responding? Are we using distraction? Are we using sleep aids? Are we using what's going on here? Is there a different way to go about this? And one of my other favorite sayings, which is so, so important, is what you think about expands. So at night, when you start this process, for some of you out there, I know you're already thinking, yeah, me at night, when I'm thinking about this stuff, my mind comes alive with worries. To a certain degree, we've kind of programmed ourselves with that, and that's not to say if we stop worrying that those things aren't important or valuable. What we want to do is retrain our mind to get to a point where it is more so thinking about, this is a time for sleep, and I'm not going to change anything. There's no benefit that is coming from me participating in this worry, concern, kind of thing. So yes, that is all about the mindset. So solutions instead of problems, putting our time, effort, focus on responding differently, getting a different solution. So I'm going to go through a lot of the somewhat regular sleep hygiene aspects. And again, a lot of these are similar. If anyone has been on a lot of the other presentations, I always come back to these because they're the foundation of what helps to form a good sleep pattern. So going to bed and waking up at the same times, right? A lot of different things are going on in a 24-hour period. We want to make sleep one of those things that the body gets used to. If there's circadian rhythm changes, hormone changes, temperature changes in our body every 24 hours, and it's kind of on that cycle. Why would we look at sleep as in, okay, some days I sleep here, some days I sleep here, here, here? it doesn't help with regulation. So that's important. Creating a wind down pattern, also very important. So doing the same kinds of things at night, which I would implore you not to watch TV on your phone, that kind of thing. You know, again, we want to be very cognizant of light exposure. Naps are workable for some people, the somewhat good sleepers of the world. If you are one of those people that you find it a little bit more difficult to sleep at night, the naps could be perpetuating the cycle, right? So sleeping a little during the night and, you know, sometimes catching up during the day, so to speak. And that's the cycle. So naps, you want to think about naps as night sleep stealers. No heavy meals, alcohol right before bed. Heavy meals can impact digestion. Alcohol can impact the rebound effect. So it's a sedative, kind of puts us down, so to speak, and once it's metabolized, it can have somewhat of a stimulating effect. So that's why oftentimes, in addition to other things like dehydration, when we drink alcohol before bed, the quality of sleep is reduced and we may have more frequent awakenings. We all know about caffeine as well. We are a culture, we're a world of caffeine lovers. And I will also say, I love a cup of coffee in the morning, you know, but we want to have that in moderation, because as much as the psychoactive stimulant effect, right, the mood enhancer kind of thing that we all love coffee for, or a lot of us love coffee for, that impacts us for a bit and then goes down, but caffeine stays in our system for a lot longer, you know, than the effect that we feel. And that can really hurt, you know, falling asleep if we have a stimulant, you know, through our body. The bedroom, it is for the 3 S's: sleep, sex, and being sick. Other than that, we really want to take all the time out of the bedroom that we can. So there are some other factors that clearly could be impactful. I work with a lot of people that, you know, their office is in their bedroom, or something else is going on in their bedroom. They need to be in there for one reason or another. What I would say then is really focusing in on not being in the bed at all, if possible, you know, only being in the other separate spaces. And this can also be if someone is struggling with, you know, chronic pain, something like that, and the bed is kind of seen as the only place that they can relax. You know, it kind of gets a little dicey then. If there's any other places that you can relax without napping, you know, usually that's better. And to make this really quick, the reason is because of the association with the bed. So we want to be asleep in bed. We don't want to be talking. We don't want to be reading. We don't want to be doing other things. You know, so just one of these factors that can impact sleep. And when we are awake, when we're reading, when we're talking to others, you know, clearly this is different for 1 minute as opposed to an hour. We're kind of training ourselves to be awake. So you want to get up when you can't sleep. The clock is not your friend. It is in the morning to wake you up, but it is not in the middle of the night. Know that this sucker is going to be on. You know, you program this, it's going to wake you up. But other than that, once you get into bed, don't worry about it. Have an internal reference to time. Don't worry about how long it's been, whatever. If you feel like you are not going to be able to sleep, you want to get up out of bed, go into a different space. So the clock is not something you want to, like, you know, continually keep tabs on. And relax. We need to relax, which is funny because when I look at it on here, it seems so simple, right? And for those of you that have been experiencing, you know, what you feel is crisis or fatigue due to high levels of stress, it's a lot easier to just say relax than it is to actually put in practice. I recognize, you know, that. But the thing is, there are ways to relax. So again, you know, one of the things that can be helpful is something called diaphragmatic breathing. simple belly breathing, mindfulness, meditation, really looking at other self-care activities, exercise, want to get the body in balance. Whatever works for you, to a certain degree, it doesn't matter. We have to have some form of being able to deregulate the body when we're stressed, when we're elevated, when we're, all of that's going on. The autopilot is something that I'll real briefly touch on. Autopilot is what it sounds like. It's our autopilot. When we are not exactly always present and in control, the autopilot kind of takes over, which is a great skill. It's a great thing that, for the most part, humans have evolved to be aware of. It takes over, for example, when we're driving, right? Everybody has this experience of when we're driving on the highway and, we missed the road or we missed the exit. That's autopilot. We're taking in sensory information and we're not in the moment, right? We're thinking about something else. We're talking to someone else. We're doing something else. But autopilot is taken over. And how this relates to other things is that when we experience a stressful, when we experience a situation and then take it in as stressful, the reason that is the case is how we process the information. And again, I kind of won't get too deep into this, but think about it. An event is not good or bad by itself. It's our perception and our evaluation of the event, what it means, right? What it means to us, what it means to our finances, to our job, to our future, to our loved one, whatever. Autopilot is one of those things that we want to be aware. And if our autopilot in dealing with stress is, I freak out kind of thing. I start breathing, I panic, I have panic attacks, whatever. There's something that's in between situation and panic attacks, right? Situation is not necessarily going to induce that. There's something in between. So anyway, autopilot though is very important in this process to start understanding what's going on, being more mindful. A simple technique is writing things out. If you are a worrier, if you are someone who gets into bed and then you start thinking about every which way that things are going to go or what's going to happen, this is a simple technique of writing out your worries earlier in the day. And it may seem funny, but, to a certain degree, if you write out for 5 or 10 minutes, a couple hours before bed, I'm going to worry about this. And what do I have control over? Right? That's the important part of this. It's looking at, okay, I can do this towards this problem. This doesn't mean you can solve everything, clearly. But for example, with things that have been going on, right? If you're thinking about, issues with the kids or issues with finances or job or something else, right? What can you actually do about it? You can't change people's minds. You can't necessarily, right? We can only control ourselves. What can you do? What are those actionable steps, right? What can you do to help you move forward? That's what's important. And so if you do that towards the end of the night, then it's one of those things that, you can kind of remind yourself, I've already done this. I'm not getting anything else out of worrying at night. I've kind of done, I have it in a book in the other room, so this is a very simple technique, but it can be helpful. And noticing this person in this photo is shrugging. Shrugging is a skill. It is a skill that I would love for the world to adapt. I mean, think about it. When you shrug, it's kind of like, well, it's hard to be so rigid and angry and inflexible and whatever when we're shrugging. Our mindset should be more so on, I can get things done tomorrow. I don't need to do this in the middle of the night. And again, if you're a worrier, notice that the worry won't change anything. And to a certain degree, if you are awake at night, a lot of people will report they'll get really frustrated or angry or upset and that kind of thing. If you're awake, you could practice mindfulness. You could practice a body scan, breathing, other things which have been shown to be helpful towards general mental health. So, again, it's not looking at the problem, it's not looking at the issue, it's responding differently, participating differently in something that may already be going on. So if you wake up once every morning at 2 a.m., that's your schedule to a certain degree, I would invite you to start doing something not productive in terms of work, by the way. That's a big key here. Work or life or emails or bills or whatever. No, you don't want to do any of that. But in terms of something relaxing, something that's mindful, that can be, in the back of your mind, realize, all right, well, I'm awake anyway. I might as well do something that can be somewhat helpful towards relaxing my body. And lighting is really important in this whole process. We want to get lots of light at the beginning of the day, and then exposure going down, throughout the day. So at the end of the night, we're not, signaling our brain we should be awake. It's day, whatever. In terms of looking at this, stress is not going to go away overnight, right? The short and the long game of this is it's not stress that should be the enemy. Because the thing is, you'll never win. We will all have events that can impact us in a stressful way. It's about responding differently. I like to call it kind of a tool belt of mental health, tool belt of adaptive cognitive skills. I don't know. I need to figure out a different name for this clearly. But the thing is, certain situations, okay, we're feeling stressed. All right, what are my options? Deep breathing, writing things out, practicing looking at what I'm telling myself. So again, you can kind of go through the different options that you have. The more we can start making positive steps, in the short game, by the time we continue to move and progress and benefit and get better at stress regulation, we're in a very different place in the long game. So the thing is, if you're making baby steps, they equal bigger steps later on. Yeah, these specific short-term changes can then lead to lifestyle and long-term modifications. But knowing, at first, short-term changes can be most difficult. This analogy is basically showing that in different areas of your life, you're going along really well. You've gotten great habits, you're maintaining them, and certain things are going well. In other ways, you're very stagnant. For basically everyone, this is the case in different areas of our lives. And what is easier, if we're going 1,000,000 miles an hour, or if we're stopped and we're trying to get started? Clearly, what is in motion stays in motion. But if we are stuck, it's really hard to move a foot at first, as opposed to if we're going 100 miles an hour, boom, we're rolling. It's easy for things to go well when things are going well, to keep it up. It's difficult when things are not going well to start pivoting and responding differently. So that's something to definitely keep in mind as well. And sometimes looking at what this will look like can be a useful technique, right? If we don't know what we're shooting for, and especially because of the aspect of this chat, a lot of it, I'm assuming for many of you, would be a reduction in stress and getting back to good sleep, So basically we want to look at, all right, stress reduction, that is a goal, right? Increasing sleep, getting better quality sleep, that is a goal. That's a much better first step than just saying, I want to feel better, right? We want to be more specific. So in particular, there's something called the SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time sensitive. The more exact we can get with changes, the better. And thinking ahead. So things happen, right? Pandemics happen. So we have to realize that if we create some kind of a game plan, it may change, and that's okay, right? So getting back on the horse, something happens. And I wanted to mention, sometimes noticing what drives you, what motivates you, can be really helpful. So I was working with someone a couple months ago, and we were identifying ways to change up when she was waking up in the morning. She was just having a lot of difficulty, had all these alarms, all these lights, everything, you know. And one of the things that really worked best was identifying the thing that she hated doing the most and making the agreement with herself that if she didn't go to bed on time, didn't wake up on time, you know, that she would have to do that thing. Well, that was picking up all the cat litter. So sometimes we kind of have to get creative, right, about what we're doing, what drives us, or what drives us to not do something. And this is a one day at a time kind of thing, right? 2 steps forward, 1 step back is 1 step forward. So realizing that this, you know, we're in the short game kind of aspect, but as we progress, as things move along, then, you know, 6 months down the road, hopefully these smaller term gains add up to larger, bigger steps. So I appreciate everyone staying on. I'm going to switch over in a sec here to see if anybody has any questions. If you'd like to work with me, I'm at Valley Sleep Center. So I put on here how to schedule. It's relatively easy. You know, we're doing telehealth appointments. So yeah, if it's something that you feel like further exploration with me in terms of the way stress and you know, crisis fatigue is impacting your sleep, I'd definitely be happy to chat with you. So yeah, you can go to the schedule appointment button, and you can schedule directly with me if you're already a patient of Valley Sleep, or you know, if you are not your first time patient, you may want to go into the portal and schedule something with one of our you know, sleep physicians to rule out if, you know, something else could be impacting this from the physiological side, like sleep apnea or restless leg, or, you know, something like that. So I'm going to switch off here. See if anyone has any questions.
Yes, please ask questions. I have one myself while we're waiting for Facebook. If you guys have questions, you can put them in the comments. I can see them. And then if you're in the webinar, feel free to chat or go to the Q&A. Thank you. That was amazing. You got a couple of people thanking you and wishing you well wishes for you and Rosie and the baby. I love the worry journal, you know, talking about how important it is to like write down what you are going to worry about, because you can like work it all out before you actually lay your head on the pillow. But my question is the autopilot. Because this is a big thing for me. Whenever, and I don't mean to make this about me, but I know there's a lot of people like this. If I have something that triggers or upsets my emotions, where I go from like level ground to here, just genetically the way I'm made up, it's what happens. I get easily upset about things. So how do I identify, first of all, when that's happening? Because I would say that's an autopilot for me. Like if you called me up and said, you know, I'm moving to Texas, or, you know, now I have to find a new sleep psychologist, I would be in a tailspin, you know? So I want to know from you, how do I identify that I'm going down that? And this could be for anybody in any situation, and especially right now because there's so much going on. People are working from home. People are teaching their kids school from home. People can't see their families. You know, grandparents can't see their grandkids, things like that. So everyone's kind of got this overdrive of cortisol going on anyway. But how do we identify that autopilot? And then can you give us some tips to interrupt it?
Sure. Well, you know, so I think that there's a couple of things that I wanted to say about that. One is that in terms of our baseline level, right? I want you to think about a piece of dynamite, over here, right? So if you can kind of think like a cartoon, I don't know, there's a wire, right? Or something you light, and then there's so much time and then it explodes, right? What's the difference between a small wire and one that's like 5 feet long, right? The difference is that it takes a lot longer. You can catch yourself a bit better. So the thing is, clearly it is better to be in a place where we have taken in mindfulness, self-care, exercise, eating healthy, nutrition, all of this kind of stuff to help lengthen our fuse in general. Because to be honest, clearly, anyone could call you at any point and say anything. So it's hard to, always have all right, this person, anytime you pick up the phone, you're going to have like a backup plan or something. So clearly that's, but in general, it's good to practice all this stuff to help lengthen our fuse. But I do think that, everyone has different triggers. And that's the thing. It takes some time. Once we are aware of our triggers, and they're different for everybody, right? Clearly we have some commonalities of the quarantine and all that kind of stuff that have happened recently. But, it's important to somewhat game plan when something happens. How do I respond? So to answer your question specifically, how do I change this autopilot? Well, you want to get to a place where you have a different set of actionable items, a different set of responses, how you are going to interact with that situation that you've kind of practiced over and over. I mean, think about it. Like, this is kind of when we are responding to stress in a different way, it is a skill. That's what this comes down to. And how do we get skills? How do we gain skills? It's by practice. We all fall off the bike the first time. So what I would say, in general, for all these stressors that people are thinking about, for you, it's one of those things. We want to look at how to respond differently beforehand. A lot of times in the moment, we can't just spontaneously, I don't even know if that's a word, like come up with a different way. Thinking ahead, being in our mind and saying, how would I respond differently, sometimes can be a helpful aspect of that.
I've had a lot of things, kind of crisis myself. I've had cancer twice, one while I was pregnant. So I've had to learn in the hard way how to find ways to deal with stress. And I've had a lot of crisis fatigue in my life, even though I didn't know what it was called. But I really liked, the worry journal and all these things. And one of the things that helped me a lot too, and I think I said this in one of our other calls, is I have like a menu of self-care things that relax me. Like you talked about relax, right? So could I just throw this out there for everyone? Like write down a menu of things that help you relax or self-care or make you feel loved, and just they're great, and write them down. Because what I do now is when I get in that autopilot mode where something happens or my fuse is shorter than it needs to be because I may not have exercised or eaten the best that day, or I didn't get the right amount of sleep, I'll just go to that list and find something, and I'll pick one and I'll go do it. And they're simple things like, take a bath, go for a walk, watch the sunset, watch the sunrise, call a friend that you haven't talked to in a really long time. And these are all things that we can do right now, even though we're in a pandemic. I bet you can write out a list of 10 things that you could do that you would be prevented from doing because of the pandemic. Don't you think? What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think that having alternatives is a very, very valuable resource. And it's interesting, while you were saying that, I was thinking, that is the response, and sometimes it can be helpful to understand what is creating the autopilot on the other side. Because for something that happens for you, Lori, you may be cool as a cucumber, and then for me, if it were to happen, then it would really stress me out. We're all different, so it's really realizing ultimately, again, a situation is not good or bad. It is our interpretation that makes it so, right? I mean, so it's being able to understand what we are saying about a situation. To what degree, how difficult is this really? I always like to kind of talk about the, people that get cut off on the highway, right? In the moment, you have the people, flipping the bird, so angry that, but the thing is, so in their immediate momentary, kind of thought process, it's like a 7 out of 10. It's an 8 out of 10. 5 minutes later, it's going to be a 1 out of 100, right? We don't care. So we want to get out of our minds, start realizing what we're telling ourselves about a situation that is creating the stress even,
Mm-hmm.
But that takes a bit more work to kind of understand where it's coming from too. So.
Great. So good. Thank you so much. So if anybody else has other questions after the fact, you're going to get an email from me. If you're in the webinar, if you're on Facebook, just drop it in the comment and I'll get your answers. So thank you so much, Dr. Frose, and congratulations on your journey of becoming a parent. It's exciting.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you.
Congratulations. Good night, everyone.